Gosh, what a different time it was in 1966. You know, we didn't lock our cars when we got out of them. We didn't lock the front doors at night. There were no cell phones. Your telephone was dialed. You had to dial it to reach someone. There was no live television capacity or minimal television capacity. There was no satellite communications of any kind in order to send a signal from the scene about what was happening. I heard on the police radio just before noon a report about a shot being fired on the campus. Okay, all right, that's no big deal. Then I got another report. Another shot was fired. I was in the newsroom preparing a radio newscast at noon, trying to get ready to get on the air, and another shot was fired. So immediately went into the radio news booth right at the top of the hour before joining CBS Network and said, "This is Neal Spelce from the KTBC newsroom. We have reports of shots being fired on the University of Texas campus. We'll get to that story right after CBS." And then bingo, we hit the network news right at the top. After that, just a couple of minutes, came back on the air, and by then we knew there was something major going on campus. So I jumped into a mobile unit along with others. It wasn't just me. We had photographers and we had other reporters going to the scene. But I jumped into the mobile unit and it pushed to talk microphone, just like on a CB radio, with a wire into the dashboard, and started broadcasting as we drove to the campus and started advising people. And I could see the tower as soon as we stepped out of the television station, just a few blocks south of the tower, and I could see what was happening. So I started saying, stay away from the campus. There's someone on top of the tower and he's shooting. Be careful. And then, of course, we were getting the reports and began a broadcast then, and that broadcast lasted until the sniper was killed. And I went off the air probably almost 2 hours after beginning that broadcast. So there we were on the scene watching this carnage. Nothing in our background, nothing in anyone's background could prepare you for what was happening at that time. Nothing. There had been no mass shootings of any kind, certainly not out in the open like we had on the University of Texas campus. It was a sight that was incomprehensible. And it was a very, very hot day, August 1st, 1966. The sun was beating down on the campus, bouncing off the walkways, the South Mall. And what you saw with all of that heat coming around, you saw these people running, screaming, shouting. You heard voices saying, "What's happening? Get down, watch out, help that person. They look like they're shot. Help, can someone help that person?" And then all relayed around that were sirens. Ambulances were running back and forth throughout the entire ordeal. At that time, we didn't have EMS. At that time, we didn't have SWAT teams. With the EMS was simply ambulances coming from various funeral homes, even hearses coming from funeral homes to carry the people who were dead or wounded off to Brackenridge Hospital. But here, the sounds and the sights, the heat, the oppressive heat, the people screaming, the people yelling, the shots, bang, bang, firing from the ground up and from the top down. And then you had the sirens roaring and moving around. A serene campus, it was not. Just moments before all this carnage erupted, it was a typical University of Texas campus. Students walking, many of them holding hands, lovers going across the campus. You had people lying on the South Mall on the grass, some of them falling asleep while reading their textbook. It was just a normal day on a life of any university campus. Nothing unusual about it until those shots were fired from the top of the tower. The impression that I got in watching and reporting what was going on was an impression, one of a great deal of heroism. People went out of their way to save people they didn't even know, or to help people that they didn't even know, or to guide them, to tell them, watch out, stay out of the way. And then we had people who rushed out there in the line of fire, and they rescued even a dead body. This Vietnam veteran, who was a law student, went out and picked up a dead body just to pull it out of the way, out of the line of fire. And he was in the line of fire. We had a television cameraman put down his camera and rush out and pull someone who had been wounded out of the line of fire just so that they could be safe. Heroism was the name of the day, as well as fear. People were scared to death. You could hear sobs. You could hear people crying. You could hear people whimpering all throughout that campus area. And it went on. It went on and on and on. It wasn't one isolated little incident. Now, can you imagine being in the middle of something like that for an hour and a half, crouched down behind a flagpole, behind a tree, and wondering why? One of our reporters was rushing across the campus, jumped behind a tree, wham, the bullet hit the tree. Sniper was trying to shoot him and it hit the tree. And his point was, he says, me, why me? He doesn't know me, why is he shooting at me, sort of thing. And that was the feeling throughout all that time while this was going on. Now, as we reported this, it became clear that the people on the ground, the police, didn't have weapons that they could use to reach the top of the tower to do any damage. Charles Whitman, the sniper, at the top of the tower, was pretty much unfettered in the way he approached killing people. He would walk, stand up, lean over the top of the wall there, behind the wall, and pick his targets and shoot. In fact, after he shot one guy on the north side of the tower, he put his gun down and then picked up his binoculars to see what kind of damage he did to that guy. A guy was shot in the shoulder, and he looked up and saw Whitman looking at him through the binoculars. So he had Whitman, the sniper, had a really unencumbered way to go about doing his damage. Then people from around this city grabbed their deer rifles and came running out and started shooting at the tower. Police officers went home or came from home off duty bringing deer rifles with scope sights, and they saved lives. I don't think there's any doubt about it, because at those points when they were firing back up at the tower, at that point this guy no longer had, well, he had to fear for his life. Before that, he had no fear. He was out there doing his damage and doing his deed without any fear of being hurt or impeded with what he was doing. When that occurred, he had to very carefully shoot through the downspouts that came when they tried to below the balustrade, or jump up, fire a shot, and jump back down, sort of thing. At one point, we thought there might be two people up there. At one point, the shots came in such rapid succession from one side, from the west side, and then from the south side. It was almost as if it was too much. And in fact, that's what I said on the air. I said, there may be two people up there, because those two shots were fired, and it was too much, too tight a time frame for one person to take a shot at someone and then run to the next place. Well, turned out he had a weapon kind of sticking out of the downspout, pulled the trigger, went over there to kind of confuse people. Police thought there might have been a couple of people up there as well, until they put a helicopter, I mean not a helicopter, but an airplane flying around to check it out. After we broadcast the fact that the sniper was dead, there was a sight that was unbelievable on that campus. Now picture the scene. You still had a few bodies lying out that had not yet been rescued. You still had people hiding behind the flagpole there on the South Mall, hiding behind trees, ducking behind cars on the drag. And then when we said, the sniper is dead, the sniper is dead, all of a sudden you had hundreds, I mean literally hundreds of people converge on the South Mall, walking, zombie-like. They were mesmerized. They weren't hugging each other. They weren't necessarily crying. They were just out there trying to make some sort of sense out of an insane act. And I don't know how they could make any sense, but there they were, and they were all over. One of the things that occurred when that happened, I was still broadcasting, and people had their transistor radios listening to it. So that's how they got the word and moved out out in that area. I found out later that Charles Whitman was listening to my broadcast while he was on top of the tower killing people. Now that is a sobering, creepy thought. I didn't know it at the time, but he had a transistor radio up there with him, beside him, and he was listening to me describe the horror that he was inflicting on the University of Texas campus. I've thought about it since then, and I thought, wow, if I had known that he was actually listening to me, what would I do? And I finally came to the conclusion it wasn't anything I could do, because it was a one-way communication. There wasn't any way to talk to him. He was just simply listening. But then I thought, well, now, could I say something that might make a difference? How do you say anything that would make a difference from a person who had killed his wife the night before, who had killed his mother the night before, who had planned this out, who had gone to great effort to take food up there with him, take an arsenal up there with him? He knew what he was going to do, and there wasn't anybody going to stop him. To hell with them. They weren't going to stop him until they finally did at the end with a bullet to him, several bullets that hit him. But I don't think I could have said anything at that point that would have made any difference. You know, when I was there, now I wasn't a hero. I wasn't standing out there in the line of fire, though he was shooting around me and over me, that sort of thing. But I was crouched down. I didn't put myself in that much of harm's way. And during the entire broadcast, it was just, I didn't feel fear. I didn't feel nervous. It was a job. There I was, broadcasting and trying to help determine what in the world was going on, warning people to stay away, and broadcasting what was happening. That's part of being a journalist. That's part of doing your job. It was very personal, because I spent 6 years on the University of Texas campus as a student. And I knew that campus, not only did I know it, it was part of me, as I was a part of the student body all that time. But you know, after that, well, that day we finished our broadcast at 2 o'clock, had to rush back to the television studio to prepare our newscast that night. And then we did an hour-long special after the 6 and 10 that went on, and intense work in that sense. But you know, several days afterwards, it didn't really impact me emotionally for days, because we had work to do for days. We had follow-up to do. We tried to figure out, okay, why didn't the police have the weapons that were necessary to reach the top of the tower to take that guy out, or to keep him from shooting and killing so many people? Why didn't they just whip out and start immediately? Well, we found out later, when we called around the United States, no other cities had that sort of arsenal. And then SWAT teams were created as a result of that incident. And now they're everywhere. And they would stop that sort of carnage almost immediately once they got the word and were headed out there. But we had follow-up stories in. What about his wife? What about his mother? What about his life in Austin? What about his role as an assistant Boy Scoutmaster in Austin? What about on campus? Were there any signs that this guy was going to jump up there on top of the tower and do all this? So we followed up with interviews with his faculty counselor, followed up with interviews with his people who worked with him at in the administration. It was just day after day after day of carrying forward the story and trying to make sense, though we never did make sense out of it, but trying to help. Governor John Connally, who several years before had been shot by a sniper that killed President John F. Kennedy, the same sniper. He was the governor at the time. He stopped a Latin American trip that he was on for economic development, flew back to Austin, and set up a commission to start investigating, trying to figure out. So all of this was part of what we were doing from Monday through Friday. And then Friday. At that point, I turned into a dish rag. It just, at that point, there was no adrenaline left. I mean, the adrenaline that had been manufactured over and over again, it was gone. And so, yeah, it sort of just wiped me out physically and mentally. No trauma, but it was just one of those things that at the end of it, and the end did not occur by Friday, but through that intense period of 5 days of work and follow-up on it, there was a period of just, wow, I'm exhausted. And of course, there was no sleep hardly at all during that 5-day period, but that's how it impacted me. Now, since then, because we had so much in the way of records, the live broadcast that we did was taped on radio. The film that was shot, I became the repository for all of that information over the last 50 years. So over the last 50 years, I've gone back regularly because of requests that have come in to talk to me about it or to find out about it, or someone doing a book or writing pieces about it. And I've stayed in touch with that occurrence for 50 years. And frankly, I view it as history. It is important, I think, for us to share this information. It's important for this radio station to be broadcasting information about it 50 years later, because this informs us as to what we are today. Think about that. Nothing like this had ever happened before, but since then, a lot of events like this have happened. We've become immune. We've just, oh, well, there's another school shooting. Isn't it awful? Well, yes, it is awful, but it has become more of a norm than it was prior to August 1st, 1966. It was a pretty serene, pretty quiet, pretty pleasant, pretty slow-paced time back then. We didn't know about security checks. We didn't have to walk through metal detectors. But there we are today. And I think it's an outgrowth of what happened back then and the subsequent events that have occurred after that.